How do you know when to take the steps to grow your brand? And what's the difference between a personal brand and a business brand? We cover that and more on today's show. Welcome to Women Leaders on the Move, a Her C-Suite radio podcast. I'm your host, Natalie Benamou. And every week, I learn right alongside you from experts who share ideas about serving on boards, creating business opportunities, loving and living their portfolio career, and how to infuse AI as a leader. I'm also the founder of Her C-Suite, a portfolio career network where women leaders are building what's next, staying in demand, and collaborating together. I would love it if you would visit us at hercsuite.com to learn more. Today's guest is Sue Kirchner. I love this conversation because she really infuses all that she's doing today in her business as founder of Brand Strong Marketing. And she's a brand strategy consulting firm who also has a podcast that she hosts called Turbo Branding Show. Let's get started with this show now so you can get all the insights. Sue, I am so excited to welcome you to Women Leaders on the Move today. Thanks for being on the show.
Yes, I am so excited to be here. This is great.
This is so fun because we just got off of your show and now we're doing this one. So how fun is that we're doing these back to back? Because now I have all these ideas in my head of what to talk about. But before we get started, can you give our listeners a snapshot of you and what brings us to this moment? Because you've had an incredible career that brought you to today.
Thank you. Yeah, I've always been in love with the idea of helping people tell their story and helping people differentiate themselves. So I had kind of a different upbringing from a lot of people. I grew up in Latin America and did Latin American marketing for a long time. But when I started to see how the power of communication and the power of messaging can push people to action, that's when I kind of fell in love with branding and helping people figure out, how do you build a relationship by leveraging your expertise and helping other people, really stand out. But I've done a variety of things. I've worked at corporate, helping with branding and marketing. I've been a partner of a brand consulting firm back in the early 2000s when no one really understood branding. Had an e-commerce store where I tried to build my own brand for a while, but ultimately landed here with Brand Strong Marketing, where I am passionate about helping small businesses that are starting to scale make it well past that $1 million mark and be able to thrive, employ more people in their community, and see their dreams come true. And I do that all by helping them leverage their brand because they're going to need to tell their story to attract customers, to attract employees to serve those customers, and also attract the capital they're going to need to pay for all of this growth. And the brand is instrumental in that. So that's where I've landed here.
It's so true. I think the brand, we underestimate the stories. And when you think about if you work at a company, the company has their origin story. They have all the stories of the people that are working there. And it can be an underutilized marketing tool. Have you found that to be the case?
Absolutely. They're focused on the product. They're focused on the features and the benefits. And they have to stop and realize that we all do business with people we know, like, and trust. Whether you're a B2B purchaser or you're a founder of a business working with another founder of a business or a consulting firm, is we want to trust and have a relationship with the people that we're working with, right? And the only way to do that is to create a story, create a bond, and that bond comes through stories. So if you're trying to differentiate your company, your authentic experiences of how you've helped other firms, your people, a lot of times, especially in professional services firms where you don't have a product that people can touch and feel and evaluate before they decide to work with you, it's all going to come down to your people because they're the ones who are delivering your product. And so you need to make sure you have the right people working for you. Your people need to make sure that they know what experience they're supposed to deliver to the customer to build a stronger brand. It's the stories around, we've got the best people and here's why, or we've done the best work for these types of clients. And here, let me tell you a story of how it worked. And let me just tell you the story about my why, my passion, the brand promise that we make that every time you interact with our organization, you're going to experience this. That's what really helps companies stand out and build those relationships to secure more business and grow. And especially in the age of AI, where tons of knowledge out there, but there's not a lot of relationships being built or stories being shared. That's going to lead to, more profitability for you.
And one of the things I think in an M&A, I know you work in the M&A space, and one of the things that companies do is when they're doing their due diligence is to look at stories. And so if you're not guarding beyond the product that you're selling, but your personal brand, and there may be, let's say, one person that might be really good in their lane, but they are not good for the company or vice versa, that can come out in that M&A experience.
I'll tell you, M&A is a place where sadly people get ignored the most, and it should not be, right? Especially in that small to mid-sized market. A lot of times you may be acquiring a company because you want access to their customers or you want access to their people. And yet in most M&A deals, the lawyers, the founders, they spend so much time on the financial part of it or the operational part of it that they completely ignore the people part, right? So when they announce this big merger and acquisition that's coming through, the customers are left standing going, well, what does that mean for me? Nobody told me what that meant. And an M&A transaction is the perfect opportunity to reevaluate the brand and tell the story of why are we bigger, better, and better for you now that we've done this transaction. And I find that they don't do that. They're so wrapped up in the technical and tactical parts of it that they forget about the relationships. And so then the customers leave because if you don't tell them something, they're going to imagine something and it may not be what you want it to be. So they may be feeling like, oh my gosh, we're going to get cut, or prices are going to go up, or we're going to lose the sales rep that we absolutely love working with because of this merger deal. Let's just jump now. And the same thing with employees. If you don't explain, this is our culture to the people who are now coming in and merging, or explaining to your existing people why this had to be done and why it's good for everyone that we're doing this transaction, again, you may see your star people walk out the door, and that could be absolutely detrimental to the ROI that you were trying to get by doing this growth strategy to begin with. There are so many stories that the CEO and the founder of the company absolutely is the steward of the brand. And it's their responsibility to be telling these stories internally that then need to be translated and shared with people externally, like customers or potential new employees and things like that. What is it like to work here? What do we deliver on our best day? What are we absolutely fabulous at offering? And who is our ideal customer? That's a story that needs to be told as well. And a lot of companies leave that until the very end, or feel like, I don't want to put a stake in the ground and define who our customer base is because we just want to serve everybody. We don't want to tell anybody no, but the way to grow your brand is to be super valuable to a specific type of customer who values that in return.
It's interesting. The first job I had out of college, the first real job I had out of college, the company that I worked at got bought out. And this was, I'm going to date myself. This was, let's just say it's been multiple decades.
Okay.
There was no cell phones. Okay. So that tells you the time frame.
Right. Got it.
What happened was the company that I worked at, it was this was a company that sold to banks decals to put on the store window to say that they accepted Visa and MasterCard. That's what I sold. Display advertising way back.
Yeah.
And the manufacturer bought the company that I worked at, and I had to re-interview for my job. But I'm like early 20s. I had no idea what was happening. And they just, called me into the conference room and were like, okay, you know, tell me why you should stay. And I thought, I don't even know what you're talking about. I did stay and they kept me. And then I left. I left the industry. So just like you said, and I mean, this is before technology was taking hold, but I think that personal experience still holds true a million years later, even more so, because if you're relying on an LLM to tell you what that story should be, that is a big mistake. How are you guiding companies in this era of AI to resist the temptation to rely solely on that? People think I can just get all my strategy from that and I don't need that human sense, but I would disagree with that. What are you seeing?
I absolutely disagree with that because, AI is a tool, as you very well know, and it can inspire ideas. It can help you refine something that you've put together and things like that. But it's not a creator. It does not create something out of nothing. So when it comes to branding and when it comes to telling your story and attracting customers, employees, capital is it has to be authentic. You have to convince someone why they should work with you, why they should work for you, or why they should give you money. And it has to be, really based on where are you going? What's your vision? What inspires you? What's your why? What's your passion? What promise are you trying to make? How are you trying to create transformation in the world? And the only way you can get at that is to talk to the founder, talk to the leadership team, talk to the employees, and figure out where do you want this company to go? What is its purpose? And AI just doesn't if you ask it to say, "Hey, give me a brand story. We do this," kind of a thing. Well, all it's gonna do is create an amalgamation of brand stories that are already out there and come back and give you something that's just kind of a mix of meh, stories of someone else. So you need to really get across that passion and you use your voice to tell it. And that's what inspires both your employees to deliver on the brand as well as the customers who want to be attracted to the brand. So again, I use AI for creative inspiration. I use AI to come up with ideas for my podcast episodes, for my blog posts, and things like that. But over 80% of that content has to be from me. It has to be my ideas, my creativity, my authentic experiences, and my tone of voice. Because otherwise, as we were talking earlier on my podcast, you can spot AI generated content very easily now. People have, whether it's the M dash or whether it's the format of the content, people recognize it and immediately say, oh, this was not created by a person and I want to work with a person. It's a big tip off and it hurts your brand more than it helps your brand. You may think you're saving time, and I get it as a small business owner, and you've been told you need to get as much content out there as possible. You need to be visible and things like that. But it has to be the right content at this point in time. It has to be authentic and it has to be based on you and what you deliver.
Hey, it's Natalie, and I wanted to pop in and personally invite you. If you are feeling siloed or trying to figure out what's next, we have a portfolio career network built around you, and I would love for you to visit it at hercsuite.com and join us. We have women that understand your path, and all of our programs are built by women leaders for women leaders just like you. Check it all out at hercsuite.com, and let's get back to this program now. It's interesting. I think about Gary Gary Vaynerchuk, who's always been a future first, very ahead of his time. And now he's like, we're going to go back to the 1850s. And I think that's an interesting idea of what is he really talking about? He's talking about the human lived experience. And so how can the brands that you're working with infuse more of that? Is it customer outreach? Is it conversation? Is it I don't know, of course, I would say trade shows because that's my background, but where are you seeing those brands that you're working with to scale, that are trying to scale, find the most success in this era of just constant change?
In this era of constant change, one of the biggest things you can do as a brand these days is build a community and offer experiences because we're all craving something new and an experience. We want to be surrounded by like minded people. We want to get out of our house some days. But I always tell my clients, I'm like, you can have an event, but make it worth the commute. Ever since COVID, it's kind of like, oh, if I have to get dressed and leave my house or leave my office or something like that, you better make it worthwhile to me to do that. And so you need to be very clear about what value are you offering when you're inviting someone to an event or an experience, or even what value you're offering if you're asking them to join a community, right? So I've seen some awesome, awesome examples of even like a knit shop in Minnesota has created a community of people who knit. And she's extended her brand to now offering these riverboat cruises. If you love knitting, come on this riverboat cruise and we're all going to get together and we're going to knit and we're going to share stories and we're going to relate to each other. And all of that builds brand. It strengthens the brand because these people are saying, you brought me an experience I would not have had if I hadn't interacted with your company. That's at a retail environment. You see, restaurants, you see them doing like special chef dinners and tables. And so you could go tell your friends, oh my gosh, I had the best time at this event and it was something so unique. Well, you can do that in a B2B experience as well, right? So you as well as two other collaborators had a online event, but it was all about helping women brand themselves in this era of AI. But it was a great experience because not only was it you teaching them how to do something, but you allowed the people to interact and get to know each other a little bit. And that creates, again, loyalty and community towards the brands, your brands as you were trying to move forward and build your own business base. So I think a lot of it has to do with, and you were talking about Gary Vee is talking about this barbell effect of you're going to have companies are going to be, doubling down on everything they do digitally, more social media, more contents, more posts and things like that. But then they're also going to have on the extreme opposite spectrum, this whole idea, as you mentioned, about experiences. Harley Davidson was one of the first examples that people always look to about this experience because they knew that people bought their product not because of the product, but because of the lifestyle they were selling, freedom, being on the road, being that weekend motorcycle warrior kind of a thing. And so they would have all these events where they'd invite people who had purchased their product to come hang out together or to go on a ride together. And that's awesome because you want people to be connected to your brand, but then you're giving them the gift of connecting them to other people who like your brand. And that's something that AI cannot replicate, cannot do in any way, shape, or form. And so I think the brands that are offering an experience in addition to any other marketing tactics that they're doing, or even the product or service that they're offering, those are the ones who are going to win. They're going to do so much better going forward in the future because, again, we're going back to that craving relevancy and authentic experiences and relationships with other people, not machines.
When you mentioned Harley Davidson, I can't get this out of my head. You probably know the famous story of the guy who got buried on his Harley sitting up. And that's like brand loyalty to a whole new level of like, I'm going to be buried with this really expensive product. I'm gonna be sitting on it. But I mean, that is really building out the brand. For some of our listeners who might be smaller businesses that are trying to get traction to get to the tier. So you work with businesses $1 to $10 million, but there might be some listeners that are in that below that range. What are some things that they can try to start elevating what we're talking about, this personal brand experience?
Personal branding is fun. And, I have a lot of connections with advisors, solopreneurs, startups who are trying to take off and all that. And it's a different beast when you're starting something new or when you are the brand. It's a little bit different than building an organizational or a corporate brand. But I really enjoy working with those people because a lot of it then is we need to do some dig deeping and self-reflection, right? Personal branding is all about what are your core values? What are your experiences? What are your stories? What's your passion, your why? What are you trying to do in the world with, the hours that you spend working and things like that? But by stopping and identifying this is what it's like to work with me, and this is the value that I can provide you. It's very helpful in allowing you to go after and generate new business because when you're smaller and you're starting, you don't know who your customer might be yet. You need to start with this is the value that I offer. This is who I am. This is what it's like to work with me. And then as you grow, you can start moving more towards, well, what does, the customer think of me and what do they think my brand is and things like that. But it's a lot about how do I want to show up? How am I delivering on, my expertise? Even if you're starting, like let's say you're a woman in her 50s who's pivoting to a new career and she's thinking about, you know what, I want to do coaching or I want to be a consultant or I want to start my own business. Even though you don't have clients that I like to say are the best way to find out what your brand is to go interview them and figure out how they perceive you. Even if you don't have those clients yet, you still have people who know you. You still have people who have worked with you. They understand your values, how you work. And it's very important to go talk to them, get their perception of you, and be willing to listen to that and be open to how they perceive you. And that's all part of the personal brand. And so I've been working with some advisors, even who are not entrepreneurs, but they are, let's say, insurance agents or wealth managers. So they have an umbrella company brand behind them, But they found, which is true, is that their clients only want to work with them because of them. They like that person. So how do we leverage that? How do we talk about what that person is and means so that you can attract more people who will find that enticing and stand that out? So I've been working on creating this workshop and coaching sessions and helping them be able to grow their brand so that they can get to that $1 million mark, or they can, flourish within their organization so that then I can then take the next step and help them as they grow their organization. Because one of the things that I find fascinating too is as you're scaling and as you're growing, the brand of the organization is usually the founder's brand. It's their core values, their why, their personality, their way of doing business. But when they hit that moment when they would need to scale, suddenly you need to transfer the brand from the founder to the organization, especially if you want to sell the company or if you want to take a step back and let the company run and you are no longer the one servicing clients and things like that. Is how do you transfer that brand from the founder to the organization? And that's the kind of work that I love doing because it's a lot of communication and it's a lot of, figuring out, well, what made you great as the founder? And then how do we make that an institutional attribute going forward?
It's so interesting that you're saying this because that's exactly where I have moved to. And I've had a creative background. So it's really hard for me to resist making changes, right? To make changes to my website, I would change the website. At one point, I made the website very founder focused. And then I moved away from that. And now I'm even further away from it. If you look at the new brand, there's a lot of beige, there's not as much pink. That also has to do with readability. My daughter helped me, who specializes in that. We kind of had these moments where I'm like, but I need the pink. And she's like, you don't need the pink. That is that moment where you have to release and let go. What is a story that you've seen of someone that when they did that, that really shifted the business for them?
Yeah, there was a woman that I had spoken to a number of years ago. It was a recruiting firm. And, she had, when I spoke to her, had come to the realization, she goes, the minute I knew that I needed to transfer the brand from me to the organization was when we would bring new hires in and they never met me. I'd maybe wave to them in the hallway, but up until that point, it's like every employee sat with me, was in a meeting with me, knew me well, could see how I delivered on the promise of what I was trying to make with the company and they could mimic that or even if I hadn't communicated it. And she goes, and so once I realized that when I was hiring people, they were no longer interacting with me and I needed them to really want to interact with their peers. She goes, that's when I knew I had to start branding the company. And so we worked on that for a couple months about how do you transfer, how do you communicate, how do you change your core values to corporate core values and things like that. And it worked successfully that she was able to sell the business and walk away on day one and not be tied to having to stay with that business. Another example was a gentleman that I had worked with. It was a third generation textile company, and it was started by his grandfather. But he decided that in order to grow, they needed to acquire another company. And as I worked through that merger and acquisition piece, we realized that the brand you were acquiring was actually a more well-known, more valuable brand in the marketplace. And so we had to work on how do we take the grandfather's name, attributes, brand, and merge them, or complement this other brand. And it was a very hard emotional, decision because he's like, I feel like I'm dishonoring, my grandfather built. And I'm like, no, you're actually building on it and making it a much more powerful company that can employ more people, which is a huge benefit, to your community and things like that. And they successfully were able to move forward and grow that company, going forward in the future. So it's exciting, but yeah, it's definitely one of those things where, it's sometimes hard to let your baby go. I was recently on a podcast with Tim Windsor. He does the Uncommodified podcast, and he's in exactly that situation where he's giving up control of his agency to the next generation. And he's like, yeah, it's weird. You have to kind of, like, as you were saying, sit back and not obsess over certain things that you would have obsessed about earlier and trust them to realize this is the foundation we want to keep and communicate that. But how you bring that forth going forward into the world could be completely different. But as long as the promise is the same, which is the power of the brand promise, as long as that why and that promise is the same, how it gets implemented can be different. And as the business owner, you have to step back and say, I trust you to go for that.
Sue, I could talk to you all day. I'm like taking mental notes. I'm like, okay, what do I need to adjust? My mind is moving like a million. If I'm like looking at you, I'm like, okay, mental note. Luckily, I get the show notes and I will share that out for our listeners. And speaking of our listeners, if they want to find you and all the amazing things that we've been talking about, where's the best place to find you?
Yeah, well, you can certainly find me on my website, brandstrongmarketing.com. Find me on LinkedIn and connect with me. I love connecting with other people and hearing their stories on brand strength and things like that. So I'm Sue Kirchner on LinkedIn, and you can find me in all the other links of where I'm at from those two places.
So good. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a delight. Thank you.
Thank you for spending your time with us today. I hope you got a lot out of this conversation, and I would be so honored if you would share it with a friend or colleague and rate and review the show. It's how others find us. Today's guest was a really big gift to me because Jen Anderson introduced us, and I really value those introductions. I appreciate it so much. And I appreciate you. We're in 58 countries around the world. Thank you for listening. I hope that this content resonated. If you have a question, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I would love to hear from you and find out what you're doing to build your next. As always, keep shining your light bright. The world needs you.